Why take one vacation with the family when you could take all of them? With Royal Caribbean, you don't just go to the beach. You visit a private island and race down the tallest water slide in North America. You don't just go for a road trip. You ATV and zip line through the jungle. You don't just go somewhere new. You rappel down waterfalls and discover ancient temples. Because this isn't just any vacation. This is all the vacations. Come seek the Royal Caribbean. Ships Registry, Bahamas.
This episode is brought to you by Pepsi Wild Cherry. Pepsi Wild Cherry is bursting with delicious cherry flavor and a sweet, crisp taste that gives you more to go wild for. Getting wild may look different these days, but whether it's opting for a solo Friday binge watch or a big night out, everyone can indulge in their wild side with Pepsi Wild Cherry. Also available in Zero Sugar. So grab a Pepsi Wild Cherry and get wild.
Hello, Duke fans, and welcome to episode number 562 of the Duke Basketball Roundup. We are coming to you just a couple of days before Duke takes part in the very first ACC-SEC Challenge. They will be traveling to Fayetteville, Arkansas to take on the Razorbacks. We are going to preview that game, but before we get into all that, I am still down on the line. I am your host for this episode. I got Jason Evans with me. Jason, how are you, sir?
I'm doing good, man. I'm excited to see the ACC play the SEC and really measure ourselves. You know, in past years, Duke was mostly winning the Big Ten challenge. You know, sometimes it'd be a little bit close, even though the Big Ten was always favored. Like every year, Big Ten would be like, oh, the Big Ten's going to win the challenge, like, 10-4 or something like that. And somehow the ACC was like always coming out on top. I hope that we can start off the SEC challenge in the same kind of way.
Yeah, and I think it has the same kind of excitement, Jason, that the Big Ten Challenge did as well. Again, playing a team either on the road or at home, a nice big time game, prime time in the challenge of this sort. I think it's really cool that we were able to kind of step in and say, all right, if the Big Ten is leaving ESPN, we can kind of pull this SEC one in and do that. But Jason, let's start with the Razorbacks. They are 53rd in KenPom, currently ranked 20th in the AP at the time we record, but on Monday morning, they will not be ranked because they have had a pretty rough stretch over the last week. They are 4-3 on the season. They have wins against Alcorn State, Gardner-Webb, and Old Dominion in the first part of the season. Then, Jason, before they went to Atlantis, they lost at home to UNC Greensboro. They were out-rebounded by UNC Greensboro in that game. They only had 7 assists. They lost the turnover battle, and they only shot 43% from the floor in that game. They then went down to the battle for Atlantis down in the Bahamas and had a really tough week in the Bahamas. They beat Stanford by 3 in double overtime. Then the next day lost to Memphis 84-79. And then in the third place game, they closed out with a loss to UNC by 15. And Jason, against Memphis, Arkansas out-rebounded the Tigers by 9. And Arkansas let David Jones go off for 36 points. And they had 18 turnovers. Lots of fouls in that game, lots of turnovers, lots of volume shooting, very, very sloppy game, and even a little chippy towards the end of the game. And then finally against UNC, they didn't shoot well. They got out-rebounded once again, and they only had 6 assists and sent UNC to the line 35 times. Before I get to the metrics, Jason, let me give you at least some of what I've seen from them over the last couple of weeks. The Razorbacks, the 40 minutes of hell type of tempo, they're not as fast as the Nolan Richardson teams of yesteryear, but they do try to get fast. They try to do the tempo that they like to do. But because of that, this team has been playing very undisciplined at times. They're not moving the ball around. They don't get a lot of assists. They like going for a lot of volume shots. They kind of take some bad shots. They have a lot of different looks. Not everyone starts every game. They have a lot of rotations. So it's honestly, I'm curious to see who they will start against Duke in this game because their starting lineup has rotated quite a bit over the first 3 weeks of the season. But on defense, they're going to put pressure on you. They're going to block shots, but that also means in their attempt to be aggressive, they're going to send you to the free throw line. So we talked about against Southern Indiana that we didn't have a great night at the charity stripe. We need to have a great line at the charity stripe because we have to expect to play a game that is going to send us to the line a lot of times, dozens of times to be able to be effective. So, Jason, let's talk about the metrics. Took a look at that. What does Arkansas do that Ken Pom likes, and what does they do that Ken Pom says you need to be worried about?
Well, on offense, they are great at attacking the basket and getting to that free throw line. They are top 10 in the country at free throw rate. They're also top 10 in the nation at not getting their shots blocked. So these guys, they're a super experienced team. They mostly play seniors. More than half of those seniors are fifth-year seniors, guys who have a COVID year under their belt. And so they are still playing. This is just a super, super experienced team. I mean, there are even guys on the roster who are like listed as juniors. And then I look and I'm like, that guy's been playing for 4 years. He's not a junior. He's a senior.
Their official roster lists 6 grad transfers and 2 fifth-year seniors. That's a lot of people who have been in college for 47 years.
Yeah. These are guys who they remember when Barack Obama was president. Let's put it that way. They are a team that is not great at hitting three-pointers, only about 33% on their threes. They don't take a ton of threes because they sort of recognize that that's not their strong point. They, like you mentioned, they play at a relatively average kind of pace. They do a decent job of holding onto the ball. They don't commit turnovers all that much. On defense, they are an outstanding shot blocking team, top 10 in the country in shot blocking. They're led by Trevon Brazil and Mekhi Mitchell, who are the two guys who sort of split time at the center position. Both of them are 6'10", 220 to 240. These are big boys who know how to position their bodies, how to put you in a bad spot, and then block your shot. Arkansas is not very good at defending the three-point line. They allow their opponents to hit better than 35% from three-point range, which is, look, it's not outrageously bad, but that's certainly not good. It's, well below average. They also, like you mentioned, they foul a lot and they put teams at the free throw line. That will be an essential part of this game. Both Memphis and UNC took over 30 free throws. I'm going to repeat that. Memphis and UNC, the two teams they played in their most recent games, each shot more than 30 free throws in their games. That is a real problem for Arkansas. Just getting to rebounding really quick, they're just an average rebounding team. A little surprising to me considering how old they are, how experienced they are, that they aren't better at rebounding. They're certainly not a great offensive rebounding team. They're better on the defensive boards than they are on the offensive boards, but they're not a team that you would expect to overwhelm you on rebounding. Ken Pomeroy says that Duke's going to win this game by a score of about 77 to 73. It is worth noting that Arkansas started the season in Pomeroy's top 15. And that's where they were in most of the other polls, the human polls, the computer polls. Everybody's sort of figured this was a top 15 kind of team. Pomeroy currently has them all the way down at number 51. I mean, Donald, you mentioned their past 4 games have been just disastrous. 3 losses in those 4 games. The only win, as you said, was against a Stanford club that, frankly, is picked as to be one of the worst teams in their conference. And that Stanford club, by the way, at the Battle for Atlantis, that's when they played them. Stanford finished last in that tournament. They went out to the Battle for Atlantis. They went 0-3, Stanford did. And it took overtime for Arkansas to beat them. This Arkansas team is struggling in a huge way. And the most important player for them is a question mark for this game. Don, we got to talk about Trevon Mark, who's someone that Duke knows because we scrimmaged against him last year when he was on Houston. He's a transfer.
Mm-hmm.
But Trevon Mark has been the guy leading Arkansas in scoring. He has been their big player. He was great against UNC, but it looked like a nasty back injury, falling down on a play late in that game against Carolina. He was taken to the hospital. There were questions as to when he was going to get out of the hospital. He's had an MRI. It looks like he's okay. But with a back injury, you just don't know. I haven't heard. I checked. We haven't heard whether he's going to play against Duke or not. He was allowed to travel with the team back to Arkansas, back to Fayetteville. So that's obviously a good sign for him. But if they don't have him, it's a big problem for them because Trevon Mark has really transformed his game from last season. He was at Houston last year. He was super inefficient. He hit less than 33% of his threes, just 42% of his 2-point shots. That's really bad on 2-point shots. But he's become incredibly efficient for Arkansas. He's over 40% on his 3-pointers this year, and an outrageous, you ready for the number? Just an outrageous 62% on 2-point field goals this year for Trevon Mark. If they don't have him, it is I'm not sure where they're going to turn for scoring if they don't have him. They're going to have some guys who are going to be forced to do things they don't normally do because Trevon Mark is such a huge part of what Arkansas accomplishes. I don't know that our preview, the most important question for this game is whether or not Trevon Mark is in uniform and suited up to play when Duke faces Arkansas on Wednesday.
He had 34 points against UNC before he went down with that back injury. So that just tells you how much he can fill it up from anywhere on the court. Jason, there's a couple other guys that you mentioned that I want to discuss. Trevon Brazil, you mentioned him. He's their main rebounder. He had 17 rebounds against Stanford. Chandler Lawson off the bench. Chandler Lawson has started. He has come off the bench, but he can also clean up on the glass. He had 13 against Stanford. So these guys can rebound a lot. But like other than that, a lot of their guys just don't rebound. So they leave it to, 2 or 3 guys to really do the bulk of the rebounding on this team. As you mentioned, 6 grad transfers, 2 fifth-year seniors. L. Ellis, we remember him from Louisville last year. He transferred to Arkansas, has been very inconsistent this year so far. Again, he started some games. There's a couple games he came off the bench. One game he came off the bench. He had 0 points. And then there's some times where he'll get, his 10, 15 points. But again, we know about him, so we know we need to look out for him.
Donald, L. Ellis is only hitting 27% of his 3-pointers this year.
Mm-hmm.
They've got to find a way. If they're not going to have Trevon Mark, they've got to find a way to score. I know Khalif Battle is a player for them that scores a good bit, but if they don't have Trevon Mark, I think L. Ellis is the guy who will probably try to take on more of the scoring load because we saw him do that against Louisville. But I'm not sure he's necessarily up to it, at least not in an efficient kind of way this year.
Yeah, and I think it leads to what does Duke need to do to go into Fayetteville and get a win at Bud Walton Arena? First of all, we talked about what we didn't have against Southern Indiana. So I'm going to start with that. Energy, effort, intensity. Those 3 things. If you ain't got it, just don't go into the gym, because you're going to need it against the Razorbacks. Because the Razorbacks, again, they may not be running as fast as they have done in the past, but they're still having an up-tempo game that requires a lot of momentum, requires a lot of energy, and it requires to match intensity. Those 3 things are paramount. Other things. Continue to keep the ball moving around. Don't let the offense stagnate. Again, you mentioned, Jason, that they do block shots, but that's usually a result of guys, taking it to the rack and not finding open men to shoot threes or even to dump off for lay-ins. Continue to move the ball around. The way that we've been getting assists is really going to help because that's something that Arkansas does not do well. And then, on defense, make Arkansas take bad shots. They're a team, again, that have made some bad decisions with shooting. They can come down and take long threes, not get a lot of rebounds. We need to make that be a team effort. Our team defense needs to be great. Our team rebounding needs to be great because I think if we do, we're better than Arkansas at those 2 things. And I think if we can do that, that will kill a lot of the momentum that can be generated by Arkansas going on those little mini runs.
Yeah, so you mentioned intensity. I think it's going to be impossible for Duke not to be intense in this game because Bud Walton Arena is going to be lit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is already. They put 19,200 people in that place. It's already the 9th largest arena in all of college basketball. And considering, Arkansas's history and Duke's history, this is a game that these folks have been, dying for a long time.
It's the first time we've gone to Arkansas to play a basketball game.
Yeah. And Ken Pomeroy has a metric where he's able to track home court advantage. He says that Bud Walton Arena is one of the top 20, top 30 arenas in all of college basketball. Those folks, they cheer for their team loudly. This is the game they've been looking forward to for a while. It is going to be a tough contest. If we don't have the proper intensity and attitude, I don't know when you could possibly have it because you're going to just be seeing a sea of red Arkansas fans chanting and cheering and just going crazy.
We'll have a lot of woo pig sueys. We're going to have to hear that all game long. I don't want to. I want to, I want that to be very, very quiet. I want Bud Walton Arena to be the quietest 19,000 set of fans that you'll ever see. Again, that game on Wednesday night, 9:15 p.m. Eastern time on ESPN. I don't need to tell you to watch that game because you're probably already going to tune in. So make sure you tune in at the right time, 9:15 on the East Coast. Hey, Jason.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that this is going to be a desperate Arkansas team as well. I mean, we talked about the recent losses. This is a team that had Final Four aspirations coming into the season, win the SEC kind of aspirations. Team full of seniors, super seniors, who expect to end their career playing deep into the NCAA tournament. And this is a huge game, just based on what's happened the past 4 games for them. This is a massive game. They can right the ship instantly by taking out Duke, or they can continue to swoon. And with those fans behind them and with the desperation they're going to have, I mean, Duke's going to have to play. We're going to have to play really, really well to have a shot in this game, because you can almost toss out those recent games because I think Arkansas is going to bring a level of effort that we haven't seen from them thus far this season.
You have to expect that Eric Musselman will have the Razorbacks ready to go on Wednesday night, and we need to do the same. Hey, Jason, let's take a quick break. On the other side, we are going to talk about the rest of the ACC-SEC Challenge. What games do you think are going to be the best ones out there? We're going to talk about ours after this.
Why take one vacation with the family when you could take all of them? With Royal Caribbean, you don't just go to the beach. You visit a private island and race down the tallest water slide in North America. You don't just go for a road trip. You ATV and zip line through the jungle. You don't just go somewhere new. You rappel down waterfalls and discover ancient temples. Because this isn't just any vacation. This is all the vacations. Come seek the Royal Caribbean. Ships Registry, Bahamas.
All right, Jason, we are back, and we're going to dive into the rest of the ACC-SEC Challenge. Again, it's the first year for this particular challenge. It's replacing the ACC Big Ten Challenge that we've seen over the last 20-some-odd years. And, Jason, there's some pretty interesting matchups here that I wanted to get your take on, the ones that you think would be the best ones to watch, other than, of course, Duke versus Arkansas on Wednesday. So, Jason, let me first go through the matchups, and then I'll get your take on the ones that you are looking forward most to seeing. We have Syracuse taking on LSU, Notre Dame taking on South Carolina, Georgia Tech is going to take on Mississippi State, Pitt is taking on Missouri, the University of Miami, my law school alma mater, will take on those stupid people at Kentucky, NC State will take on Ole Miss, Clemson at Alabama, Wake taking on Florida, UNC taking on Tennessee, UVA taking on Texas A&M, Virginia Tech taking on Auburn, Florida State taking on Georgia, and Boston College taking on Vanderbilt. There's no Louisville in this first one. Of course, the SEC right now has 14 teams. Next year, this will be a little bit different with the conference realignment. But Jason, I rattled off some of those games, but which ones are you looking at to be some of the ones that Duke fans especially should tune in and watch?
Well, look, I mean, the one obviously the Miami-Kentucky game sticks out as a big matchup, but I'll tell you also, like UNC Tennessee just came off they just got 2 losses where they lost to Purdue and Kansas. There's nothing wrong with losing to Purdue and Kansas. Mm-hmm. That's going to be a huge game. The Virginia Texas A&M game, A&M has been looking like an outstanding team lately. That's a huge one. But I'll tell you something, Clemson, Alabama, because Alabama's a very, very good ball club. And Clemson, I know, really wants to prove that they belong in the conversation for, the top tier of the ACC. I think that's a really interesting contest, and one that I'm not saying Clemson will surprise Alabama, but I won't be shocked if it happens. I love the fact that that's it's got kind of its own time slot, so to speak, on ESPN. Like the NC State Ole Miss game will be going on as well that evening. But the main game, in 9:30 p.m. tip, that's a big slot for Clemson and Alabama to be playing basketball. Ordinarily, Clemson and Alabama, you think that's a big football game. It's a big basketball game. And so that's the one, aside from the Duke game, I think that's the one to me that holds the most interest for me, mostly because I'm interested in seeing is Clemson for real? Is Clemson really as good as I think they might be? And so I'm dying for that game.
Yeah, Jason, I think the one game that I'm looking at are some of these games that you have games that can determine who wins the SEC ACC challenge, right? It's not the Duke versus Arkansas or even some of the big games that you mentioned. It's some of these lesser tier games. The one I'm looking at, Virginia Tech versus Auburn. That's going to be one I think is going to be interesting. Also, Wake hosting Florida is going to be one that I think is going to be pretty interesting as well. Again, those are games where you may not be sitting there saying, oh, this is going to be a really big time matchup, but those are the little ones that we can pick off that could mean the difference between the ACC winning and losing this challenge. So I'm really curious to see a couple of those games happen. And hey, Jason, Florida State, Georgia. Florida State is hosting Georgia. Florida
Come
State.
on, man.
No, but no, hear me out. Hear me out. Florida State won their holiday tournament. They've been playing a little bit better lately. And I mean, Georgia's not great, but I like I said, those are the games that we need to win this challenge. It's not necessarily one that you need to tune in and watch, but keep an eye on those because again, that's going to be at the same time as we're playing. So don't watch that game. Watch our game, but keep tabs on that to see how the ACC is doing relative to the SEC because, again, this helps with seeding down the line for the NCAA tournament. This helps when they say, hey, the ACC is top to bottom a better conference than the SEC. That could help when it comes to some of these at-large bids as we're evaluating who's in and who's out in March. So it's interesting to see some of these games and how they match them up. There's not a lot of great matchups in this, but there are some that you definitely should look out for. Yeah,
the last one that I'll mention, Pitt versus Missouri, because first of all, gotta love Jason Capel, but I feel like this Pitt team, there's a chance that they could impress and be a top tier contender in the ACC. And this is the kind of game that you just can't. They're playing at home against Missouri. They just cannot lose that game if they're really gonna. Yeah, it's a game that'll look decent at least when the time comes for NCAA tournament bids. So that's another one that I'm looking at that I think is an important one.
Yeah, I think the whole thing is going to be great. It starts on Tuesday night, Syracuse, LSU, Notre Dame, South Carolina, Georgia Tech, Mississippi State, and Pitt, Missouri will tip off at that 7:00 hour. Those are the first games of this ACC-SEC challenge. Good luck to the ACC. I know Sam is not on here to say that he hates every other team but Duke in the ACC, but I think all of us want to see the ACC do well in this challenge. But that will do it for episode number 562 of the Duke Basketball Roundup. Thank you as always for listening. Remember, check us out, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. Send in your headlines for the game against Arkansas after it's done or during, if the mood strikes you. We love to hear from our listeners. And again, we will take up the best headlines for our show. Home Field Apparel. They're running a Black Friday sale that's kind of extended to Cyber Monday. So keep checking that out. DBR Podcast. Use that code for 15% off. And also Fanatics. Click on our affiliate link there to save us some money and get, at least put a couple of pennies in our pocket. I see Jason needs to, kind of clean the china behind him on his wall. And that requires cleaning products that he needs the extra pennies for. So until then, for Jason Evans, I'm Donald Wine. And now it is time for the Duke Band to play us out and take us home.